Death is a subject no one likes to think about, but sometimes the thoughts about death consume us. And this is especially true when you lose a friend or a parent or a loved one. There's no nice way to say it. Losing someone you love is an incredibly painful experience, and one everybody goes through at least once during their lives. Grief and its feelings of numbness and sadness, sorrow, anger, and guilt are all a part of our lives when a loved one dies. As a licensed marriage and family therapist, I'm unfortunately familiar with the process. However, I know that eventually these feelings ease up and we're able to accept loss and go forward with our lives. But what if you can't? What if loss haunts you, interferes with your daily life, and keeps you from adjusting to the absence of your loved one? What is complicated grief? Complicated grief is experiencing the symptoms of grief for a year after the loss of a loved one. For a person experiencing complicated grief, they may struggle accepting their loss, develop physical health problems, have trouble functioning in their regular life, and have relationship issues. It's hard to diagnose complicated grief. Everybody grieves in their own way, and one of the nastier things you can say to somebody grieving their loved one is that they're doing it wrong. Apart from self-harm and substance abuse, there's really no wrong way to grieve. Some people grieve openly. Others tend to lose themselves in their responsibilities and do their best to move forward. Like I said earlier, grief gets easier with time, but complicated grief lasts. In general, complicated grief lasts for over a year after the loss of a loved one. Problems complicated grief can cause. Left untreated, complicated grief can cause many problems. Depression, anxiety, PTSD, sleep disturbances, health problems like heart disease and substance abuse can all develop due to complicated grief. Is what I'm feeling complicated grief? Again, it's not easy to determine if you're feeling grief or complicated grief. The biggest symptom is time. If you're still feeling the intense sorrow, numbness, sense of detachment, and more a year or more after your loved one passed, that could be a sign. Think about where you're at. Are you having relationship issues due to grief? Do you blame yourself or think about what you could have done after your loved one passed? Are you struggling to trust others, feeling bitter about their death, or thinking that life is meaningless without your loved one? Many of these thoughts are part of the grieving process for many, but over time, these emotions can snowball, drive a person to substance abuse, or worse, engage in self-harm. And if you're thinking of self-harming yourself, please call or text 988. It's the National Suicide and Crisis Hotline. What causes complicated grief? Obviously, losing a loved one. However, there are certain factors that can make complicated grief more likely. A violent, unexpected death is one, as is the death of a child. If your loved one was part or all of your support system, your circle of friends, or if your relationship was dependent, as if the case of many caregivers, their loss can trigger complicated grief as well. Having pre-existing mental health conditions can be risk factors for complicated grief. Borderline personality disorder, PTSD, mood disorders, and more can all trigger complicated grief. And finally, if your loss leaves you feeling socially isolated or puts you into a financial hardship, it can result in you experiencing complicated grief. Is complicated grief treatable? Yes, there's an emerging form of talk therapy called complicated grief therapy that is specifically designed to help people deal with complicated grief. Similar to treating conditions like PTSD and depression, it helps people deal with grief reactions, grief symptoms, healthy ways to adjust to loss, and how to move forward in life. I know how hard grief is. With the right help, you'll be able to adjust to your loss and do what they wanted you to do. Live a long and successful life in your own happiness. Have you or are you struggling with grief right now? Drop us a line in the comments below. Grief is one of those subjects we can all help each other with. I'm Jeremy Arzt, and I help create the programs here at the Edge Treatment Center. I've seen many people in crisis leave here with an entirely new perspective on life and loss. And if you're struggling, reach out to us at 844-590-0403. We'll help you find a better way to manage your loss. Also, give those like and subscribe buttons a click. We are always posting recovery content. Thank you again for watching our video. We'll see you next time.